I've been spending a minimum of $5 million every Q4 for the past 7 years on Google Ads. And here's the thing, Q4 is one way before it even hits October. So in this video, I'm going to go over the 5 different phases of Q4 that allow you to crush the final 3 months of the year. And the thing is, the first phase of Q4 does not begin in October, but right now when I'm recording this video, between August and September, because this is phase number 1, the foundational phase of crushing it during Q4. And what most brands get wrong is they think this foundational phase is all about coming up with the best offers for Q4. It's all about just fulfillment and making sure the supplier gives you the best rates possible for your product, which, don't get me wrong, is absolutely important. But in order to have the best possible Q4, it's not about getting ready to spend as much money as possible. It's about building that base that will allow you to spend that money, and that too profitably. And during Q4, what most of the brands we work with under my agency or marketing like to do is they like to pull the data from the previous few Q4 to understand several things. Number 1, what drove that brand the most during Q4? Number 2, doing a complete product feed and Google Merchant Center cleanup, because the last thing you want to be dealing with during Q4, especially with Google Ads, is any sorts of disapprovals or suspensions. Number 3, making sure the data you see on your Google Ads dashboard is, number 1, actually accurate, and number 2, relevant to what you see in the back end. And when you combine it with the inventory conversations, with making sure you have enough inventory, enough products in stock for Q4 scale to actually happen, that's when you're even on the right path. But in terms of now speaking more about the intricate details of how Q4 planning should even begin, here's the thing. Looking at last Q4 is not about just understanding how many campaigns you had running or what the bids and budgets were. It's about the intent of the traffic that was coming through the door. For example, this is a jewelry brand which we actually recently started working with, but during Q4 of 2025, essentially if we look at all of the campaigns they had running, we can see that they did about $1.6 million in revenue with $300,000 in ad spend. That's about a 5x ROAS in general. But here's the thing, their overall blue line, which in this situation is the impression line, and if we look at the ad spend line, stayed fairly flat. They had some peaks, but then the next days that followed would go right back down. This is an example of a brand which did not properly plan for Q4, because the jewelry industry becomes very hot and very popular during Q4. It's almost common to expect double or triple in spend during this time. And the main reasons why this brand did not successfully have the Q4 that they could have actually had was because, number 1, they only had 6 campaigns running during this time, and number 2, a lot of these campaigns were hogging up majority of the budget, which was preventing the brand from actually going out into the world and testing different strategies, testing different tactics, which should have been done prior to the actual approach of Q4 and during the testing and foundational phase between August and September. Because the thing most brands get wrong is they think Q4 is about finding that one perfect approach, that one perfect strategy to double, triple, quadruple down on. And that is true to an extent, but that's only after you have extensively spent some time, effort, energy, and money testing to figure out the right approach. And this is where the transitionary period in terms of the campaigns even starts to happen for majority of the brands. Because what we run most of the brands with is the 60-40 rule, which essentially says 60% of our budget should be going towards the profitable and scaling campaigns, and 40% of our budget should be going towards testing. But brands like these, where majority of their budget is actually just going towards scaling and they barely have 5,000 or a little bit less than that spent on testing, the problem here is when it's time for Q4, they're not adequately prepared and they exhaust their approach, they exhaust their assets, imagery, even the product approach by the time Q4 even hits. So the ideal approach during this transitional period during August and September in terms of campaigns is to have the 60-40 rule in place, where 60% of your budget is going towards scaling campaigns, 60% is going towards scaled that have already been tested profitably and are actually profitable to begin with, and the rest of the budget, 40% of the entire approach, should be going towards the testing phase, which is essentially when you're getting those final tests in, whether it be in terms of the campaign types, going after performance max or search or standard shopping, and also individually in terms of the imagery, the assets, videos, creatives, etc. that you have in play. Because the main goal during this time, from going from August and September into the first period of Q4, which is October, is to go from that 60-40 rule to eventually the 80-20 rule, which is when you start spending a lot more money on just what's working, and 20% or less, ideally 10% eventually in the middle of Q4, towards testing different aspects out. Before we move on to phase 2, here's the general thing you want to understand about phase 1. This is the final testing period where you're essentially pushing to understand what are the key numbers and the key metrics in place that can really move the needle, really move the business to the next level. These are things such as what SKUs work the best during this time period, the bundles you have in place and what bundles are working better than others, conversion rate improvement, because naturally during Q4, your conversion rate is going to increase. But what you want to make sure is that as you scale your budget and your overall ad spend, that the conversion rates follow and you're not ending up in a situation like this where your conversion rate is barely at a 0.02% in the main season, in the main time period. You also have the backend email flows in place, the backend automations, SMS flows, and the SEO improvements all together and properly aligned. Because phase 1, which is August and September, is getting that proper foundation in place so you can finally move on to phase 2, which starts essentially in the middle of September to the end of September. This is what I call the ramp up period. Essentially what we're doing during this time, and this is not just for this jewelry brand, but any brand in general which we work with, which by the way, if you're run a brand making over $50,000 a month in revenue, you would like to get some extra help scaling profitably and consistently with Google Ads to the next level, especially if you're watching this before Q4, scan the QR code on the screen or click the first link in the description below to directly schedule a call with me, and let's see how we can work together to make that happen. But September is when we actually start the scaling phase, and that's only after our foundations are in place. And your main goal during the ramp up phase, as I like to call it, in September, late September, is to focus on certain trigger points that allow you to push budgets or increase bids as rapidly as possible. Because see, here's the thing. During the first few days of September, you are going to naturally notice that your overall costs in terms of the CPCs for Facebook ads, that might be the overall CPMs, are naturally starting to rise. And we can see a great example of this if we just add in a specific metric here, let's say the average CPC. We can get a general idea of how these CPCs start to range during Q4. This is a brand which is a fashion brand that did extremely well during Q4. But essentially, for a lot of the brands, CPCs can either remain stable or they can start to ramp up while the ROAS starts to ramp down. This is just essentially what happened during Q4 for this brand. It starts to go down from 13x, 12x, 9x down to a 9, 8, and eventually a 7x ROAS at cold traffic scale. But that is to be expected because the main metrics and trigger points which I'm focusing on during this phase from September into early October are: number 1, search impression share; number 2, click share; and number 3, search lost IS rank due to budgets or bids. So search impression share, to go over it very quickly, is this metric right here. Essentially, this is telling you how your search impression share is moving as we go into September and October. If we, for example, compare September 15 to October 15 to the previous period of Q4, we want to get a general idea for your brand individually, whether you're getting more impression share or whether it's decreasing. For this brand, last September 15 to October 15, it actually increased, which means we were getting more eyeballs on our ads. However, there was a small drop off of click share, meaning the number of people that were actually clicking on our ads compared to how many were looking at our ads. And of course, along with this, we were trying to look at search loss IS rank and search loss impression share rank due to budget. Essentially, this told us that we were starting to lose more and more impression share because we were losing due to a lower ad rank compared to our competition. Maybe they were improving their product feed. Maybe they were offering better offers. Maybe they increased their ad relevancy. Whatever the situation may be, we were losing our ranks due to the impression share versus the budget. And this tells us that the budget during last Q4 was not an issue. In fact, we were gaining more rank because we were spending more money, but that was kind of a compromise we had to make because we were losing in terms of the ad rank itself. So that means our ROAS was going down, which was natural in this situation. But we're keeping a very close eye during this phase because now this is the phase where our competition is already becoming a lot more competitive. What that means is, for example, in an industry like this, your competition might start running more promos and you might see their prices becoming the color green. Maybe they improve their product titles or product imagery to relate to Q4. whatever the situation may be there, they're directing their ads more towards the buying intent audience, the holiday season audience, which is higher buying intent quality and more impulse buys. This is the main phase where impulse buys start to happen. People are actually also actively looking for promos and offers in place. But once the ramp up phase is in place and you have answers to all of the specific metrics, you know exactly what SKUs are working, what the bundles are working, and you've implemented proper strategies and implementation in place to take care of your search impression share, click share, and the search last rank, you then move on to phase 3, which is essentially the early to mid-October phase. This is before Black Friday, Cyber Monday week, and essentially where the aggressive ramp-up phase truly begins. Now, this is the phase where we actually go from the 80-20 rule, which we were essentially playing with from the middle of August and middle of September, to now the more aggressive phase, which is the 90-10 rule. So if we look right over here, during this time is essentially when we are trying to spend a lot more money, as much as humanely possible, while making sure our actual profitability is still in check. So as we can see here, we went from spending about $22,000 in late July to then $50,000 a week in August, and then finally we started to ramp up in middle of October and even November to $75,000 and eventually $114,000 during Black Friday and Cyber Monday. But the reason why we were able to make this happen for a brand like this is because, first of all, we had stopped any sort of testing in the middle of September. All those campaign types you wanted to test, all those products you had remaining with 0 clicks, you want to leave that for Q1 to Q3. Q4 is not about testing, it's about expansion, it's about scaling. And what you want to do is during this time, you want to put more focus on what's already working, aggressively increasing budgets and aggressively decreasing bids as necessary every 3 days to every 5 days. Because the thing is, for your Black Friday, Cyber Monday season to be successful, you don't start increasing budgets during Black Friday or before, a few days before Black Friday. Rather, you do it in terms of the weeks and even the month prior leading up to it. So what we're doing during this time and why we were able to go from 45, 50K to then immediately doubling almost to 75K, then 114K in a short period of time was because we had trained our algorithm and rewired it to accept this level of scalability, to accept this level of growth. And we did this by basically forcing changes every 3 days to every 5 days. There are certain periods during the scaling phase which might seem that like they are unprofitable, but you have to just get through them to make sure that the algorithm can handle these big drastic changes come Q4. And the main goal here is not to essentially look at the CPCs, but rather the top line revenue and the overall profitability and the distinction between branded versus non-branded traffic. Because see, the thing is, as you scale during Q4, it's natural for CPCs to increase. In this situation, they decrease, but it's also natural if you don't have built as much authority as this brand for the ROAS to decrease and the average CPA to increase. The last thing you want to do during this time is to essentially start focusing on just arbitrary values, arbitrary metrics such as CPAs or CTRs, and rather look at Google Ads as a small part of the entire ecosystem and the top line revenue. Because during the third phase, before Black Friday, Cyber Monday hits, it's all about a balancing act between scaling ad spend versus ROAS and top line profitability. And the key here is to analyze around search terms and ensure you're pushing more of the products and keywords which are actually in demand right now. So the search term section, the insight section during this time becomes your absolute best friend because it's literally telling you what's working and what's not. And especially the insight section, for example, if we go inside the insight section, we can get a general idea of exactly what Google is pushing more of our ads through and how those specific keywords and whatnot are trending compared to the previous period of time right before that. So for example, we're looking at July 16 to August 12 for this brand, but comparing this to what you will see come September, October, November, you want to look at what's increasing in terms of conversions and search volume and what's decreasing, because during this time, the optimizations you do in the back end for the product titles or the product descriptions should all be based on these numbers right here. If something's increasing by 230% or 70%, you better bet that should be in your product titles or description, especially before Black Friday, Cyber Monday hits. And anything that is trending down, for example, this one is minus 22% or minus 33%, we should look into eradicating that for the Q4 season so that it can be replaced with something that's actually driving majority of the spend and majority of the demand right now. Because once you take care of all of these things before Black Friday, Cyber Monday, early to mid-October, then we move on to the fourth phase, which is BFCM week. This is the time period where your entire backend system, including fulfillment, should be ready to handle a large surge of orders in most industries and most niches. And the key here is not to play around with restrictions, because the lesser restrictions you have during this phase, the greater your scale will be. So what you want to be doing is essentially getting the brand ready to have little to no restrictions during the period of Black Friday, Cyber Monday, which essentially comes around in November, because you want the ad spend to be as high as possible without any restrictions, assuming you have built through the first 4 phases of the business. And this is where stability and building that foundation really comes into play, because during the month of November itself, you can have individual campaigns that spend upwards of $100,000, multi-six figures, just profitably and consistently, which is the ultimate goal for the brand. But essentially, you want to approach Black Friday, Cyber Monday with the goal of ramping up budget, so when Black Friday and Cyber Monday week is actually here, you can make adjustments on an hourly level, and you should have the intention of spending robust targets without any restrictions for the bids, essentially. And you want to be able to spend as much as possible while ensuring that any promos and offers are already pre-scheduled within your Google Merchant Center and ready to go live the moment Black Friday and Cyber Monday hits, and it's the moment it's 12 a.m. And what we like to do is we like to, after Black Friday starts, take things in terms of data, because the thing is, normally I wouldn't recommend looking at data on a daily basis, let alone on an hourly basis. But Q4 and Black Friday, Cyber Monday is that special event where you can actually go in and adjust budget specifically every few hours, every hour, every 2 hours, every 3 hours. Ideally, you want to let a campaign spend for up to 3 hours before you go in and start maximizing budget, start wanting to spend more money. You can even launch bigger campaigns at higher budgets just for the Black Friday, Cyber Monday time period. And that's essentially what we do. But here's the thing, and where most brands lose a lot of money during Black Friday and Cyber Monday. It's when you start making panic changes. Panic changes are not the way to go here, because all the changes you make every 3 hours, every 5 hours should be based on proper UTM tracking, proper data tracking. And this is where it pays off to make sure conversion tracking has been in place during the foundation phase of August and September. You have triple whale in check. You have anything else that might allow you to make those changes radically in place. Because if we look right over here for this brand specifically, we can see November is when we can really go from spending a couple $1,000s a day in overall ad spend. For example, $10,000, and then increasing it by 20% to 30%, $12,000, $13,000, and then eventually really boosting it up and doubling and almost tripling the spend based on the numbers and whether it makes sense or not. But let's assume it's past Black Friday now, and you have really pushed the brand up to its peak, up to its levels. You're making changes every few days, every few hours, and now you are in the phase that's after Black Friday. Let's say essentially the end of November to basically the end of December, and even early or middle January, essentially, because that's when Black Friday really starts to end. So if you look at it right here, we can see a normal kind of trajectory and line play out, which is most common in majority of the niches out there. This is the fifth phase, December essentially and onward. This is what I call the slowdown phase. For most brands, the last thing you want to do during this phase is try to work against the search terms, try to work against search volume and spend more money and try to bid higher, because more often than not, whatever money you made during these 4 days of Black Friday, Cyber Monday week will be lost if you try to push aggressively or overly aggressively. And essentially what you want to do and what we do during this phase is allow the data to tell us which way to take the brand. For some brands, if you can support scaling all the way up to middle of December or end of December, you should by all means spend as much as possible, but not at the same level as you would during Black Friday and Cyber Monday. But what you want to keep in mind is last minute window shoppers are still in the market during the month of December, all the way up to the middle of December, maybe even December 20th or 25th, depending on how quickly you can deliver things. And the key here is not to overdo any sorts of promos, any sorts of offers, because last minute shoppers are more than happy to pay premium prices to get the product delivered on time. That's one key thing you want to keep in mind for the days and weeks leading up to the end of December. So as you can see here for this brand, we went from spending $26,000 on the 1st of December to then spending about $15,000, about 20 to 30% less. And eventually, as we got more and more closer to the middle to late December, we even further pushed down the spend because the profitability was started to tank, because we were noticing search volume was coming down with it. You want the data to let you know whether you should continue pushing in a certain way or whether it's time to slow things down in that aspect. But the main goal for the ramp down phase, basically phase 5 December and onwards into January, is to ramp down back to the 60-40 rule and then the 50-50 rule in January, which means in January, you should be only focusing about 50% or less of your budget towards scaling and profitability. And the rest of the budget should be, again, going back to testing, because the reality is once you hit January, once you hit late December, whatever was working during the majority of Q4 will now have stopped working, and you will be back to the trenches, back to the drawing board to now understand going into Q1, what is the new demand, what is the new search volume and the overall approach that your audience is now going after, and what do they prefer to buy during that time that's different during Q4, because chances are high that the buying intent will be very different from high buying intent to maybe medium and low buying intent as you enter phase 5, as you go towards the later portion of phase 5 into January. But strategically handling Q4 with these 5 different phases, starting with August into September, the foundational phase, moving into phase 2, the ramp up phase, which starts September, moving into October, early to mid-October, going into the phase number 3, which is before BFCM, then finally hitting phase 4, where you actually just focus on scaling. So if you want to think of it like ecosystem approach, phase 1 to phase 3 is all about getting ready for phase 4, and then phase 5 is essentially slowing down from phase 4, because the main goal of Q4 is to get that phase 4 right and to make as much money as possible profitably without losing sight of where things are going long term for the brand. But again, if you run a brand making $50,000 a month or more in revenue, you would rather get some help scaling profitably and consistently with Google Ads to the next level. Scan the QR code on the screen or click the first link in the description below to directly schedule a call with me, and let's see how we can potentially work together to make it happen.